Wait, you can read that. Those were the words that stopped time in the grand library of Professor Leonhardt Grayson, a man the whole world called the living dictionary because he could speak 45 languages and understand. Dozens more. His home was not a house, but a museum of words books filled the walls like bricks. Ancient scrolls lay scattered across tables and every surface. Breathed stories from forgotten lands. That day, the sunlight filtered through tall windows, dancing over a yellowed parchment that had haunted the professor for months. A page, written in a language no one could identify the edges, were torn, the ink faded, yet it carried a mystery that refused to die. Leonhardt had spent 6 months trying to unlock the symbols carved onto that fragile paper. He had flown scholars from Africa, Asia, and Europe. He had run digital scans and even consulted AI models. But the results were always the same: unknown. Language origin unclassified. That single phrase felt like mockery to a man who had spent his life conquering tongues he had written books on. Ancient Greek and Sanskrit, debated with Oxford historians, and lectured in Paris and Tokyo. Yet now he was losing sleep over words he could not name. In the corner of the room, a young girl sat quietly, sketching on a piece of paper. She was 12 years old. Her name was Amara, the daughter of Maria, the housemaid, who had worked for the professor for almost 10 years. Maria had brought her that day because the school was closed and she could not leave her. Alone at home, Amara rarely spoke. She preferred to listen. Her big, curious eyes studied everything, from the dusty maps on the wall to the way the professor's hands trembled when he turned pages. To Leonhardt, she was invisible, just a child of his maid, sitting in silence while adults worked. But what no one knew was that her mind was not ordinary. She had a memory sharper than glass. She could remember the lyrics of songs after hearing them once. She could mimic accents after a single sentence. And she loved languages, though no one ever noticed. That afternoon, as the professor muttered to himself, his voice echoing frustration, "If only I could understand what these spirals mean," a soft voice broke the silence. "Sir, that symbol means rain." He froze. His pen stopped. In midair, slowly, he turned to look at the little girl sitting cross-legged on the floor, her voice trembling but confident. "That one," she said again, pointing with her pencil. "It means rain. My grandma used to sing a song with that word." For the first time in years, the great Leonhardt Grayson was speechless. Leonhardt stared at the girl for a long moment, unable to decide whether to laugh or to question her. Further, the air in the room grew still. The ticking clock on the wall sounded louder with every passing second. He finally managed to speak. "What did you say?" Child, his tone was calm, but his eyes were sharp. Amara looked down nervously, her small fingers fidgeting with the pencil she held. "I think it means rain," she whispered. "My grandma, she used to sing songs in a language that sounded like that word." Leonhardt leaned closer to the parchment, curiosity creeping into his voice. "Tell me more. What kind of songs were they?" Amara hesitated before answering. "They were stories about the sky and the rivers," she said slowly, "about how the rain brings life." My grandma said the words were from the old people before the village, had names. She never told me where it came from, but I remember the sounds." The professor felt a strange chill run through him. The words she described carried the same rhythm he had been analyzing for months. Could it be that this child knew something no scholar did? Impossible, he thought. Still, he wanted to be sure. He took another sheet from his desk and pointed at a different symbol. "Fine. Then if this means rain, what does this one mean?" he asked with a slight smile. "That one," Amara replied. After a moment, "That one means river. And that next one, mother, I think so, because my grandma used to sing them together. Rain, river, mother." For a second, Leonhardt felt his world tilt. The words she spoke matched the phonetic patterns he had just begun to suspect. He quickly scribbled notes, comparing her sounds to the script. His hand trembled as he wrote. The pieces were fitting together in a way that defied logic. The girl had recognized the meaning instinctively, without study, without training. She was connecting sound to symbol through memory. Maria stood frozen by the doorway, broom still in her hand. She didn't know what to say. Her daughter had never shown this side. Before, she had always thought Amara was just good at remembering songs, but this was different. This was knowledge that no one else had. Leonhardt finally looked up from his notes, his voice softer now. "Child, do you Know what this is you may have just unlocked. Something the world has forgotten. Leonhardt felt his heartbeat quicken as he stared at the little girl in front. Of him it was as if the air had thickened around them. Every instinct in his scholar's mind screamed that what she said couldn't be real, and yet something deep down told him it was. He decided to test her further. He pointed to another line of the faded parchment and asked gently, "And what?" About this one, Amara leaned forward, her eyes following the strange symbols as if tracing a familiar path. She whispered, "That one means sun or maybe light." She paused, then smiled shyly. "I think it means both, depending on how you sing it." Leonhardt froze. The dual meaning she mentioned matched a linguistic pattern he had once observed in early Nubian dialects she was identifying. Grammatical rules without even knowing it. He felt a shiver crawl down his spine. His whole career had been built on deciphering complex linguistic structures, yet this child, this maid's daughter, was doing it by instinct. He quickly pulled out his notebook and began scribbling. Everything she said, his mind racing. Through connections, phonetics, syntax, historical, migration patterns, it all lined up too. Perfectly to be coincidence. He turned to her again, his voice now almost trembling. "Say that word again." Slowly, Amara repeated it, her tone shifting slightly as she sang the syllables, softly, almost like a lullaby. And as she did, something remarkable happened. The rhythm of her voice seemed to breathe life into the symbols on the page. The professor could almost feel the ancient language awakening through her. He pressed further, asking about line after line, and with each question Amara answered with quiet confidence, sometimes unsure of the exact meaning, but always right about the sound and flow. She could sense the spirit of the words even when she didn't know their translation. It was as if the language lived inside her, waiting to be remembered. Maria watched in stunned silence, tears forming in her eyes. She had always known her daughter was different, but she never imagined this. Leonhardt finally sat down, exhausted yet exhilarated. He looked at the child and whispered to himself, "Unbelievable. This is genius, pure genius. She's not just repeating, she's understanding. She's translating from memory that was never taught." In that moment, the great professor realized he was no longer the teacher. He was the student, and the little girl sitting before him might just be the key to unlocking a voice that had been silent for thousands of years. Leonhardt sat back in his chair, his mind spinning faster than his pen could move. The child had just done what world-class linguists could not, and the weight of that truth pressed down on him like a storm. He looked at Amara, who now sat quietly drawing again as if nothing extraordinary had happened, and then at Maria, who stood frozen by the doorway, eyes wide with confusion and pride. Leonhardt finally broke the silence. "Where did she learn this?" he asked, his voice low and almost trembling. Maria hesitated, unsure if she should even answer. She wiped her hands nervously on her apron and said softly, "My mother used to tell stories in our village tongue. A language," she said, "was older than anyone could remember. She passed before Amara was born, but she used to sing those same songs to me. I could never understand all the words, but Amara remembered every sound." Leonhardt leaned forward, elbows on the desk, his sharp blue eyes now filled with wonder and disbelief. He whispered, "You mean to tell me this child is repeating a dialect passed down through song?" Maria nodded. "Yes, sir. My mother called it the speech of the ancestors. She said it was sacred, something we must never forget. Even if no one else remembered it, Amara would hum those songs before she could even speak properly. I thought it was just a child thing, but now I don't know. Maybe it's something more." Leonhardt stood and began pacing the floor, muttering to himself. The phonetic structure, the repetition of vowels, the melodic intonation, it all fits. It's not random, it's organized. This isn't just memory, this is inheritance. He turned back to Maria, his voice rising with excitement. "Do you understand what this means? Your daughter may have just revived a language thought, extinct for over 1,000 years. Amara looked up at them. Wide-eyed, she didn't understand why they both looked so serious. She simply said quietly, "Grandma always said words have souls. Maybe the words wanted to be heard again." Leonhardt froze. Her sentence hit him like thunder. Words have souls? What a profound idea from a child so young. He felt humbled in a way he never had before. In that instant, the room no longer felt like a professor's study. It felt like a temple of discovery where the forgotten past spoke again through the voice of a little girl who had unknowingly carried history in her heart. Days turned into weeks, and the quiet home of Professor Leon Hart Grayson transformed into something magical. Every morning, Amara and her mother arrived just after sunrise, the smell of old paper and coffee filling the air. The professor would clear his massive desk and place the fragile manuscripts in front of Amara, who would sit with her small fingers tracing the shapes as if greeting old friends. Leon Hart would sit across from her, notebook ready, eyes sharp, every movement of her lips sending ripples through his mind. He had never seen anything like it. The way she spoke was not guesswork, it was instinct, as if her soul had lived in that language for generations. Leon Hart began to record everything. Her voice, her songs, her pauses, each sound she made carried meaning, rhythm, and emotion. He noticed something extraordinary. Whenever Amara sang one of her grandmother's lullabies, the script on the parchment seemed to align with the melody. The symbols danced with her, words their placement perfectly. Matching her tone, she was not only translating, she was interpreting the music of meaning. Soon Leon Hart realized this was far beyond a linguistic miracle, it was a historical revelation. He started to piece together the patterns Amara revealed and discovered that the language combined elements from ancient Nubian Bantu and Proto-Saharan roots. He named it Nyakan, which meant the sun speaks in Amara's tongue. He whispered the name reverently because it felt like calling light into existence. Amara worked tirelessly, never complaining, never showing pride. She simply loved the process of bringing the words to life. She sometimes said softly, "It feels like the stories are talking back to me when I say them." Leon Hart felt his throat tighten every time she spoke like that. He had studied languages his entire life, but this girl taught him something no textbook ever could. Language was not just symbols, it was memory, music, emotion. Maria would sit nearby watching, silently, with a heart full of awe and disbelief. Her daughter, the quiet, shy girl who once played alone, was now the center of something the world had long forgotten. Sometimes tears would slip from her eyes as she listened to the songs of her mother echoing again through Amara's voice. Leon Hart would write deep into the night pages, filled with notes and translations, his excitement uncontainable. He realized the greatest discovery of his career had not come from intellect or science, but from a little girl who carried the light of her ancestors in her words. The news spread faster than Leon Hart ever imagined. Within a month, whispers of a young girl who could translate a lost African language began circling universities and cultural institutes across the world. Journalists called wanting interviews, historians requested access to the recordings, and linguists from across continents begged for a glimpse of the mysterious child prodigy. They called her the little linguist and the girl who spoke the sun's language. Leon Hart tried to shield her from the attention, but it was impossible. The story was too extraordinary to hide. When the University of Cambridge invited Leon Hart to present his findings, he insisted Amara must come with him. "She is not my assistant," he said firmly. "She is my teacher." The hall was packed with scholars, journalists, and students, all waiting to see if the story was true. Amara sat quietly on stage, her feet barely touching the floor, the bright lights reflecting in her curious eyes. Leon Hart stood beside her, holding the parchment that had once mocked his intelligence. Now it was a symbol of wonder. He began the lecture, explaining how the symbols matched the tonal patterns of Amara's songs, how the language had roots older than any known African script. And then he turned to her and said, gently, "Amara, would you please read the first line?" Amara looked at the crowd, then at the parchment. She took a breath and began to sing the words softly, her voice carrying through the hall like wind through trees. The melody rose and fell, gentle and ancient, each note echoing something that felt alive. When she finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then, suddenly, applause erupted, thunderous, and endless people stood wiping tears from their eyes. Leon Hart felt his own heart swell with pride. News channels broadcasted the story worldwide, calling it the rebirth of a lost tongue. Documentaries were made about the discovery. Amara's name became a symbol of brilliance and hope for young black children. Everywhere, proof that genius can bloom anywhere, from any home, from any heart. When she walked into her small school after the event, her classmates cheered and hugged her. She smiled shyly, but all she said was Grandma would be happy they remembered her songs again. And in that moment, even the most cynical reporters understood this was more than history. This was heritage coming back to life. But with the attention came doubt, and Shadows, not everyone, was ready to believe that a maid's daughter could accomplish what scholars with million-dollar grants. Could not critics appeared on television, claiming the professor had invented the story that the girl was being used as a publicity stunt. Others questioned her background, sneering that a child from a poor family could never possess such knowledge. Leonhardt felt anger like fire in his chest. He had spent his whole career chasing truth, and now that he had finally found it, people accused him of lies. Amara didn't understand the cruelty. She asked softly one evening while sitting in the study, "Did I do something wrong? Why are they angry?" Leonhardt knelt beside her. "No, my dear, you did something right. The world just struggles to accept that brilliance can shine from unexpected places." His voice shook slightly, but he smiled. "You must keep speaking your truth." He decided to silence the doubters, not with words, but with proof. He arranged a public demonstration at the National Museum where linguists could test Amara directly. Scholars from different countries attended, carrying their own copies of undeciphered inscriptions. They placed them before her one by one and watched as she traced the lines with her finger, humming quietly and then speaking softly. Her translations matched contextual patterns that experts confirmed were historically sound. She was flawless. In the middle of the session, Amara paused. Over a particular line, her brow furrowed. She looked up at Leonhardt and said, "This last page is different. It's not a story, it's a message." He blinked, surprised. What kind of message? She began to read slowly, translating as she went. "When the voice of the forgotten speaks again, the world will remember where it began." The hall fell silent. Everyone stared at the child who had just spoken, words that felt older than time. Leonhardt felt his eyes sting with tears and whispered, almost to himself, "That's you, Amara. You are the voice of the forgotten." The audience erupted into applause, this time not in disbelief, but in reverence. Even the harshest critics stood speechless. Amara's message had silenced the world, the same way the ancient words once silenced the wind, and from that day forward, the girl who once hummed to herself in her mother's shadow became the light that reconnected humanity with its lost past. Years passed, and Amara grew into a graceful young woman, her name now written in history books beside the world's greatest linguists. She traveled across Africa, recording songs from elders preserving dialects on the edge of extinction. Every time she spoke, she carried with her the warmth of her grandmother's voice and the belief that no word, no culture, and no child should ever be forgotten. Professor Leonhardt watched proudly from the front row at her first international lecture, where she said with a smile, "They once called me the maid's daughter, but languages don't care about titles. They only care about hearts that listen." Her words echoed through the hall, and the crowd rose to its feet in thunderous applause. The girl who once sat quietly in the corner of a dusty library had become the voice of the past and the hope of the future, and somewhere deep inside, Leonhardt knew the true discovery had never been the language. It had been Amara herself. Video outro, 15 seconds of script. Soft music fades in warm and inspiring voiceover. Genius can come from anywhere. Sometimes it just needs a voice to be heard. Fade in text, like, share, subscribe. Chi voiceover. If you love this story, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring tales of hidden brilliance. Music swells softly, screen fades to black with final text. Every voice matters, every story deserves to be heard.